Thank you. I want to go back to a comment that somebody made about the huge acreage that we're talking about in Iraq and Afghanistan. And tribes.
Louder, please.
And tribes. These are tribal nations. They always have been. And for some reason we've spent treasure on trying to impose democracy on tribal nations. And I wonder whether or not there's a real belief still existing in Washington that that's possible. Or whether we have to come back with some basic principles. Chris mentioned, it was mentioned, one of you gentlemen mentioned, that basic human rights, and of course, what are basic human rights? The right of women, the right to not have violent societies. But what if that's the very nature of tribal communities? What's our role? And so history doesn't repeat itself. I mean, how far back do you have to go to see that people felt, countries felt, rulers felt that they ought to, that they should impose their own systems in that area? It hasn't worked. I don't believe it'll ever work. Of course, I'm taking out of that alternative motives such as oil and energy. I'm assuming that we don't have those. I don't believe it. But for this conversation, why will we ever succeed in changing the basic tribal nature in this part of the world?
Listen, I think that one of the ways that the United States can change that reality is by leading by example. I think you're right that we can't exert with force our values overnight on another society or culture. But we can lead by example and show people that there is a better way, that there is an ability to live a more freer, more expressive life under a different kind of government. And then it ultimately has to be that society's choice whether or not they adapt that kind of societal structure. And I will just throw it out there that I think the United States, especially over the last 10 to 15 years, has been imperfect in setting that example, right? I mean, we preach human rights, and then we violate people's civil liberties on a daily basis by listening into their conversations illegally. We tell other countries that they need to observe international conventions of war, and then we torture people. And so the United States probably cannot, as you say, impose our particular prescription of society on other nations, but we can at least be an example.
But we've said we've been doing that.
We make the mistake sometimes. Remember the celebration of the Purple Thumbs in Iraq, the first time they voted? As Americans, and I like that you say it's not about oil, let's take the most optimistic scenario, which is that this sort of neoconservative strain, which was a lot of the impetus into the Iraq War, they really believed that you could bring a democracy to a place like Iraq. We tend to think that just if you turn up and vote that you've got a democracy. Baloney, right? We've learned this over many hundreds of years. Free press, independent judiciary, institutions that have been built up over time. There's all kinds of institutions that do not exist in any of these places, and so I think we need to be very, very clear about what we can do, and it's a lot more limited than what we thought we can do. It turns out that when the Taliban need to go away, we can make that happen. When Muammar Gaddafi needs to go away, we can help make that happen. But the next day turns out to be the problem. Our military is second to none. But once you've taken out a Gaddafi, or dare I say an Assad, because we're going to be asked, I think, to vote on $500 million to back the people who are fighting against Assad, when Assad goes away, what happens the next day?